He didn't plan to stop. He was just a single dad trying to get home before the storm got worse. But at that lonely bus stop, soaked and shivering, sat a young soldier with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and nowhere left to go. What he said next would change both their lives forever. "You're coming with me." What began as an act of kindness soon became a journey of healing, second chances, and a kind of love none of them saw coming. If stories of compassion, resilience, and unexpected miracles touch your heart, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel, settle in, and let this unforgettable story remind you sometimes the simplest choice opens the door to the greatest miracle. The rain didn't fall. It slammed wild and cold, slicing sideways across the narrow county road like it held a personal grudge. Wade Bennett narrowed his eyes against the storm as his truck's wipers battled in vain. Mud sprayed from his tires with each turn. March in Montana was a moody thing, unpredictable, unforgiving, and far too familiar. He had driven this stretch of road every evening for the last 3 years, ever since he left the city behind and settled in the modest, timber-framed house his father built decades ago. Life now was quieter, simpler, or so he told himself. A half-empty lunchbox rattled in the passenger seat beside him. His son, Jesse, had forgotten it again. 10 years old, and already had his head in the clouds, just like his mother used to say. Wade smiled faintly at the thought, but didn't linger there. Then, through the downpour, he saw her. At first, just a shape at the edge of the road, hunched, still, soaked to the bone. A person small and silent sitting on the rusted bench at the old bus stop that hadn't seen a working bus route in years. Wade's foot hovered over the brake. He told himself to keep driving. It wasn't his business. Maybe it was someone waiting for a ride. Maybe not. But then the lightning cracked, lighting her face for the briefest moment. A soldier. Not just the uniform, the posture, the gaze fixed far off like she wasn't sitting in the rain at all, but somewhere else, somewhere, colder, louder, harder. She looked young, worn down, not from age, but from carrying too much too soon. He pulled over. The truck creaked as he opened the door. Rain hit him like gravel. She didn't flinch, didn't even look up. Her hood was low hair stuck to her face in damp strings, and her duffel bag, no, a military backpack, was cradled tightly in her lap. "Ma'am," Wade called, careful with his tone. "Nothing." He stepped closer, boots squelching in the mud. She noticed him now, eyes lifting slowly, warily. Green eyes, haunted. "You all right?" he asked, adjusting his cowboy hat against the wind. "I'm fine," she said hoarsely, waiting for the bus. "There ain't no bus here," Wade replied gently. "Hasn't been one for 3 years." She blinked. That truth settled on her face like defeat. No anger, no panic, just tired. "How long you been sitting here?" he asked. She shrugged. "A while." Wade looked down the empty road, then back at her. The wind howled through the pine trees lining the ditch. "I've got a warm truck," he said. "And dry coffee if you don't mind it burnt. Name's Wade." "I'm not a creep." She gave the faintest smile, or maybe it was a twitch. "You don't look like one." "That's comforting," he said with a half chuckle. "Still, you're coming with me." The way he said it, firm but not forceful, caught her off guard. Like it wasn't a question. Like it was the only right answer to a question she hadn't asked. She hesitated, then slowly stood, her boots squishing as she adjusted the heavy backpack. He reached to take it, but she stepped back instinctively. "I've got it," she said quickly. Wade nodded. He didn't push. He just opened the passenger door and waited. Back at the house, Jesse's muddy sneakers were already by the door. The boy had probably let himself in after school and forgotten to call again. The smell of damp wood, faded flannel, and old coffee welcomed them as they entered. Wade helped her hang her coat on a peg near the door. She didn't say much, didn't meet his eyes. He offered her a towel, and she accepted it with a nod. "You can warm up by the stove," he said, motioning toward the old cast-iron fireplace glowing in the corner. She nodded again and walked over, setting her soaked backpack down with utmost care, almost reverence. Wade watched the way her hand lingered on it. Protective. Maybe it held something fragile. Or maybe everything she owned. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated. "Claire. Claire Monroe." "Nice to meet you, Claire." He offered a clean mug. "How do you take your coffee?" With silence, she muttered, then shook her head. "Sorry," that was. "It's all right," Wade said, a soft smile tugging his lips. "I prefer mine that way, too." She sipped slowly. Her hands, he noticed, were steady, but her eyes weren't. They scanned every shadow, every noise in the house, the way soldiers do when they don't know if the war's truly over. Wade didn't pry. He just leaned against the kitchen counter and sipped his own cup. Rain battered the tin roof. Jessie would probably peek out any second and bombard them with questions. But for now, it was quiet. Claire finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to stop, no?" Wade said, watching the firelight flicker across her face, "but I wanted to." She looked at him then. Really looked. For a flicker of a second, her walls cracked. He saw it. Not pity, not fear, just a hint of relief, of being seen. And in that quiet kitchen with rain drumming and ghosts unspoken, something unnamed settled between them. Not love. Not yet, but perhaps the first shelter either of them had felt in a very long time. The next morning came in shades of gray. Wade stood by the window in his kitchen, sipping the same oversteeped coffee he always drank. Outside, the storm had passed, but a cold mist lingered coiling low along the grass and fences, like the breath of something ancient and unsettled. Behind him, the house was quiet. Too quiet for a place now holding 3 souls under one roof. Claire hadn't said much after finishing her coffee the night before. When Jessie had finally appeared, his usual whirlwind of curiosity. Wade had gently shooed him away, sensing Claire's walls hadn't come down far enough for questions from a 10-year-old with a heart the size of Texas. He had given her the small back room, formerly his late father's den, now stripped down to a bed, a chair, and a single lamp. She hadn't asked for more, just nodded, thanked him with the kind of voice people use when they're not used to being helped. Now the door to that room remained closed. Wade glanced at the clock, 7 to 18 a.m. Jessie had left early for school after scribbling a note about a science project and grabbing a peanut butter sandwich. Still no sound from Claire. He sighed and turned away from the window, deciding to let her be. Healing didn't work on a schedule, especially not for people like her. But when he walked down the hall to grab his boots from the mudroom, he stopped. The door to her room wasn't fully closed. A sliver of it was open just enough to reveal the edge of the bed and the unmistakable silhouette of Claire, curled on top of the covers, still fully dressed, clutching that oversized backpack like it was a life raft in a world trying to drown her. He paused. The image struck him harder than expected. He'd seen soldiers like her before years ago when he was younger, and life hadn't yet emptied out around him. He remembered their eyes focused wary heavy with the weight of things civilians could never name. He had grown up around men who served his brother, his best friend, even his own father, who never said much after returning from Vietnam except, "War steals the part of you you didn't know you couldn't live without." Wade backed away from the door quietly. She needed time, not questions. Claire awoke to the smell of eggs and toast. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling looked unfamiliar, the bed too soft, the silence too safe. She sat up abruptly disoriented, clutching the backpack tighter, before remembering the road, the storm, the cowboy hat, and the quiet man with kind eyes, who simply said, "You're coming with me." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and rubbed her eyes. Sophie hadn't made a sound. She leaned down and checked the pack, still closed, still undisturbed, still safe. Claire walked into the kitchen with cautious steps. Wade stood at the stove, flipping something in a skillet. He turned his head slightly as she entered, but didn't speak right away. "Hope you eat eggs," he said after a beat. "Didn't take you for the oatmeal type." Claire crossed her arms, unsure how to reply. Her voice felt lodged somewhere between her throat and her memory. "You don't have to talk," Wade added, almost as if reading her discomfort. "But you could eat. And sit. I reckon you're not made of stone." That coaxed the faintest smile from her. She sat. He placed a plate before her, 2 eggs toast, with just the right amount of burn and a slice of ham. Nothing fancy, but it steamed in the cold morning air like a blessing. She picked up her fork slowly, almost reverently. They ate in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind, just the sort that 2 strangers, who were no longer quite strangers, shared when words were still too heavy to lift. Wade finally broke it. "Your little one okay?" Claire froze fork halfway to her mouth. She looked up, eyes hardening. "I didn't look," he said, gently lifting his coffee. "Didn't need to. I've seen the way you hold that pack." Silence again. Longer. Tighter. Then she whispered, "Her name's Sophie." Wade nodded. "Pretty name. She's 4. And she's special. Needs help. More than I can always give her." Wade set his mug down, letting her words hang in the air, letting them be enough. "She asleep?" he asked softly. "In the pack. It's the only way she stays calm in new places." Wade didn't react with judgment or surprise. He just nodded again. "You're safe here, Claire. No one's gonna knock on that door and tell you to leave." She blinked, startled by the certainty in his voice. "Why?" "Because I've had my own nights holding too tight to the only thing I had left," he said. "And I figure, maybe it's time someone held back for a change." Claire looked away quickly, but not before he saw her lip tremble. She didn't cry, but she wanted to. Later that morning, while Wade cleaned up the dishes, he heard a tiny sound, a whisper of breath, a soft flutter. Claire had brought the pack into the living room. She had laid out a folded blanket and gently lifted her daughter into the sunlight streaming through the window. And there she was, Sophie. Tiny. Pale. Wearing a soft knit cap and a medical tube along her chest. Her hands clenched slowly in the air like she was grasping invisible things. Jessie would have asked 100 questions by now. Wade didn't say a word. Claire sat beside the child, brushing her daughter's wisps of hair. "She loves the sun," she murmured. "Even if she can't say it, she feels it. Like it's reminding her she's still part of the world." Wade nodded, standing quietly behind them. "You both are," he said. "Part of this world. And if you'd like, part of this home, too." Claire hadn't planned to stay more than a night. She had become good at leaving. Years of moving between shelters, motels, church basements, and hospital waiting rooms had taught her how to disappear before questions started piling up. She didn't want pity, didn't want handouts. And she certainly didn't want someone like Wade Bennett, kind, grounded, impossibly gentle, to feel obligated to save her. But as the morning stretched into afternoon, and Sophie lay peacefully under the patch of sunlight near the window, Claire felt something she hadn't in a long time. Stillness. No rush to move on. No dread of being asked to leave. Just the soft hum of Wade's boots on the wooden floor, the faint ticking of the old clock above the stove, and the low, reassuring sound of breathing, hers, Wade's, and Sophie's. That last one mattered most. Wade had seen many things in his life, some beautiful, some brutal, but nothing prepared him for the moment he saw Sophie for the first time. She was small, far too small for 4 years old. Her limbs were delicate, wrapped in faded pink pajamas with worn cuffs. A tiny tube taped carefully to her chest ran from a discreet oxygen compressor nestled in the corner of the backpack, humming so faintly it could be mistaken for silence. Her lashes were long, her face pale, and still, as if sculpted from porcelain and breath. Wade had paused in the doorway, his coffee cooling in his hand. Claire was kneeling beside her daughter, holding one of Sophie's tiny hands in both of hers. She hadn't noticed Wade watching. She was whispering a lullaby, slow and sweet, the kind mothers sing without realizing it. Her voice was soft, softer than anything he'd heard her say aloud. When she did look up, their eyes met, and Claire didn't pull away. Instead, she said, "She gets tired fast, even when she's just lying down." Wade nodded, stepping forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the child. "She's beautiful." Claire's throat tightened. No one had said that to her in a long time, not without a note of sadness or awkward surprise. Just beautiful, like any other child, like Sophie was something worth seeing. "She has cerebral palsy," Claire added quietly. "Oxygen therapy, speech delay, gross motor issues, the works." "She doesn't look broken," Wade replied, crouching beside them. Claire blinked fast. "She's not," she said firmly. "She's just fragile. But she's strong, too. Stronger than I ever was." Wade glanced up at her. "I don't know. You're the one carrying her, and that pack across God knows where in the middle of a storm." Claire looked down at Sophie and gave a small, watery laugh. "The pack was my idea. I could never leave her behind, not even to pee. And people stare when they see her. Sometimes they pity. Sometimes they whisper. But the worst is when they look away, like she's invisible." "Not in this house," Wade said, voice low and sure. That night, Wade set up the spare bedroom for Claire and Sophie. It was a small space with faded wallpaper and a dusty dresser, but it was private. Safe. He had pulled out a twin mattress for Sophie low to the ground, and even added a little reading lamp beside it, just in case Claire ever wanted to read her bedtime stories. Claire stood in the doorway, Sophie curled against her shoulder, already asleep. Her arms ached from holding her child all day. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, she no longer felt entitled to admit. Wade didn't hover. He didn't offer to help carry the girl or insist on doing anything grand. He simply said, "Sleep here as long as you need." "No strings." Claire hesitated. "I don't know how long that'll be," she admitted. "I'm not counting," Wade replied. It was that simple. In the middle of the night, Claire awoke to a soft cough, Sophie's. She sat up instantly. Years of hyper-alertness had trained her to move quickly, quietly. She adjusted the oxygen tube, checked her daughter's pulse, gently rocked her until her breathing evened out again. She hadn't realized Wade was standing at the door until he cleared his throat. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop," he said, holding a glass of water. "I just heard her cough." Claire exhaled. "It happens when she's cold. Or scared. Do you need anything?" She hesitated. "A night without fear." He gave a sad, knowing smile. "I can't promise the world, but I can promise no one here's gonna hurt you. Or her." Claire stared at him, not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. That was the terrifying part. The next morning, Jesse finally met Sophie. He bounded into the kitchen, hair a mess shirt half tucked, holding a comic book in one hand and a slice of toast in the other. His eyes went wide when he saw Claire at the table, Sophie dozing in a small beanbag Wade had pulled from the attic. "Whoa, who's the princess?" he asked. Claire froze. "She's not a princess," she began to say, unsure how to explain. But Jesse beat her to it. "Yeah, she is. Look at her crown," he said, pointing at Sophie's wool cap. "That's definitely a magic hat." Claire blinked. Wade grinned into his coffee. Jessie turned to Claire, beaming. Can she play dragons with me when she wakes up? She doesn't really walk, Claire said gently. Or talk. Not like other kids. Jessie shrugged. So would I talk enough for two? And with that, he plopped onto the floor beside Sophie and began drawing with crayons on a folded napkin. Claire had to excuse herself. She stood in the hallway, one hand pressed to the wall for balance. She hadn't cried like this in years, not from fear, not from grief, but from being overwhelmed by kindness. Wade stepped beside her quietly. Sometimes the best parts of the world are 10 years old and don't know what judgment means, he said. Claire nodded, her shoulders trembling. I don't know what we're walking into here, she whispered. But for the first time, I don't want to run. Claire had never made pancakes before, at least not the kind that flipped golden on a cast-iron skillet, while a boy with sleepy eyes and a crumpled comic book sat at the table humming off-key. Not the kind that came with real maple syrup and laughter that echoed through the rafters of an old Montana farmhouse. She stood at Wade's stove in borrowed flannel, her hair tied up in a loose knot, feeling oddly domestic and deeply out of place. But somehow, not unwelcome. Sophie sat near the window in her cushioned chair, wrapped in a quilt Claire had found folded in the linen closet. Sunlight slanted through the blinds and painted her cheeks with warmth. She was awake but silent, her eyes wide, as Jessie explained how dinosaurs could have survived the Ice Age if they'd only invented mittens. Claire flipped the next pancake, trying not to smile. Wade leaned against the counter behind her arms, crossed, watching the whole scene with quiet satisfaction. You're not bad at that, he said, nodding at the skillet. Claire arched an eyebrow. You expected me to be? Well, Wade replied, judging by the way you tried to use a whisk to open the coffee canister yesterday. Claire shook her head, biting back a laugh. You keep that to yourself, Bennett. I wouldn't dare. They ate together at the table. Wade, Jessie, Claire, and Sophie, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Claire carefully fed Sophie soft bites, dipped in syrup, wiping her mouth gently with a cloth napkin. Wade noticed how Claire's hands never shook when they were caring for her daughter. It was the only time she seemed completely grounded, anchored by love, not fear. Jessie took 3 pancakes, then came back for a 4th, declaring them mom-level good, which in his book was the highest culinary compliment possible. Claire's face softened. That word mom still hit like a stone skipping across water. She hadn't heard it said in her direction in years, not since Sophie was a baby, and her husband still alive. Hearing it now from a boy not her own opened something in her she didn't know still existed. Later, while Wade and Jessie cleared the plates, Claire helped Sophie settle by the window again. On a whim, she pulled a square of colored paper from her duffel bag, one of the last few sheets she'd kept from a therapy session at the VA hospital. She folded it with steady fingers, creasing the corners precisely. Jessie watched from the table, fascinated. "What's that, a crane?" Claire said. "In Japan, they say, if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, your wish comes true." Did it work? Claire hesitated. "I don't know. I never got past 300. Maybe you didn't wish hard enough." "Maybe." Jessie walked over, dragging a chair beside her. "Will you teach me?" Claire blinked, surprised. "You want to learn origami? I want to fold wishes," he said simply. She nodded. "All right then. But be warned, it's addicting." They sat together, folding paper birds in silence as Wade watched from the kitchen. Something was happening here. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. Jessie, who had never had a mother figure since his wife passed, was quietly gravitating toward Claire, not just as a guest, but as someone he instinctively trusted. Claire, who had learned to shrink into shadows, was slowly beginning to fill the space around her. And Sophie, bless her quiet, brave soul, was blossoming under the Montana sun. Later that afternoon, as Jessie napped on the couch, Claire stepped outside with Wade. The porch creaked beneath their weight. The air was still crisp, but the sky was finally clear. Wade handed her a mason jar of lemonade. Claire sipped it slowly, cradling the cool glass between her palms. "Your boy's something else." "He's his mother's son," Wade replied. She had that same brightness, like the world couldn't darken her for long. Claire looked down at the steps. "You don't talk about her much." "I do when it matters." They stood in silence for a while. Then Claire spoke, voice low. "I didn't just lose my husband overseas. I lost my family too. They blamed me for enlisting. Said if I'd stayed home, none of it would have happened." Wade didn't respond with pity, just presence. Claire continued. "When Sophie was born with complications, they called it punishment. Said I'd chosen war over motherhood, and God had noticed." Wade's hands clenched at his sides. "I'm not religious," he said quietly, "but I don't believe in a God who punishes women for being brave." Claire turned her head toward him, startled. There was no judgment in his face, no apology for the bluntness, just conviction. She swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not. I don't know how long we'll stay. You don't have to." Claire stared at him. Her eyes were tired, but open, truly open for the first time. "What are you, Wade Bennett?" she asked softly. "Some kind of saint," he chuckled. "Far from it. I'm just a guy who knows what it's like to lose more than you planned for, and what it means when someone doesn't walk away." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. That night, as the sun dipped below the hills, Jessie proudly hung a string of origami cranes across the mantel. Claire helped him tie each one with thread. Sophie watched from the rug, her eyes following every color like it was magic. Wade stepped back, arms crossed. "What's the wish?" he asked Jessie. Jessie beamed. "That this stays. Us. This." Claire turned toward Wade, and for the first time she smiled with her whole face, not just a flicker, but a real blooming smile that said, "I might be learning how to live again." Claire stood at the edge of Wade's back porch, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with tea she hadn't touched. The late spring air was brisk, not yet warm enough for comfort, but just gentle enough to invite reflection. Beyond the porch, the field stretched wide, and gold dotted with low cedar and cottonwoods. A hawk circled above in slow, deliberate loops. Inside, Jessie was helping Sophie read a picture book, mostly describing the drawings in exaggerated voices, while Sophie giggled with every dragon roar and nightly mishap. The sound was faint from outside, but full enough to wrap around Claire's tired heart. She still couldn't get used to it, the peace, the safety. It felt borrowed, like stepping into someone else's dream. Wade approached with a soft tread. He didn't ask to sit beside her on the steps. He just did, holding his own mug and watching the land like it held answers neither of them could reach yet. Claire broke the silence. "How do you do it?" Do what Wade asked without looking at her. Let people in. Trust again. He took a long sip before answering. "I don't think it's about trust. It's about need." After a while, even stubborn hearts get tired of hearing their own echo. Claire didn't respond right away. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Sometimes I still sleep in my boots," she said finally. "It's stupid. But there's this fear that if I let myself relax too much, someone will show up and say, 'Time's up, Monroe. Back to the sidewalk.'" Wade turned to her, his voice quiet. "That ever happened to you twice. Once outside a shelter in Kansas, I fell asleep sitting against the wall with Sophie in my arms. They woke me up with a flashlight to the face and a citation for loitering. The other time was at a church basement in Phoenix. A volunteer said Sophie's equipment was a liability and told me to leave before other families showed up. Wade's jaw tightened. That's cruel. Claire nodded, staring out at the field. People don't mean to be, I think. They just don't know what to do with you when your pain looks different than theirs. Wade had scars, too. Most of his weren't visible. He'd been a family man. Once, happily, he thought. He met his wife, Erin, during college. She was all fire and laughter, a school teacher with a stubborn streak and a smile that could bend steel. Jesse was born 5 years into their marriage. Life was noisy and bright and never slowed down. Then came the illness. It was subtle at first. A cough that wouldn't go away. Fatigue that lingered. Then the scans. The words no one wants to hear. Stage 4. Terminal. He cared for her until the end. Quietly. Fiercely. Alone. And when it was over, there was nothing left of him but routines. He built his days around Jesse, around work, around chores, anything to keep from remembering the silence Erin left behind. He hadn't let anyone new in since, not because he didn't want to, but because the idea of loving and losing again felt unbearable. Until Claire. She wasn't like Erin. Claire was sharp-edged where Erin was soft, quiet, where Erin was bold. But she carried a strength Wade recognized, the kind forged in the fire of grief and responsibility. That's what drew him in. Not pity. Not even attraction at first. Recognition. Later that evening, Wade brought out a box of photographs. They sat at the kitchen table after Jesse and Sophie had gone to bed. Claire sipped a glass of water, her guard down more than usual. "This was Erin Wade," said, sliding a photo across the table. Claire picked it up gently. The woman in the photo had honey-colored hair, sun-warmed skin, and eyes that smiled as wide as her mouth. She held a toddler Jesse on her hip, both laughing mid-spin on a picnic blanket. "She looks like Joy," Claire murmured. She was. Claire studied the picture. Was it hard letting her go? Wade didn't answer immediately. It was harder letting go of the life we built. The inside jokes, the little routines, the way she knew to pour cream in my coffee before I even sat down. You don't just lose a person. You lose the part of yourself that only existed because they saw it. Claire looked up at him, eyes shining. That's exactly it. He nodded. "And you?" Claire hesitated. "Ben, my husband, we served together. We were deployed to the same unit in Syria. I was medevac, he was logistics. We married on base under a tarp with 2 witnesses and a borrowed Bible. When I got pregnant, we both requested reassignment stateside." Her voice began to tighten. "But we were ambushed during a supply run. I made it out with shrapnel in my shoulder. He didn't make it out at all." Wade reached out instinctively. Claire flinched at first, then let his hand rest over hers. "Sophie was born a month later," she whispered. "Too soon. Too small." She spent 6 weeks in NICU while I sat outside the glass praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Wade squeezed her hand, but gently. "I don't know what brought you to that bus stop, Claire. But I thank God, or fate, or dumb luck you were there when I passed." Claire's lip trembled. "Why, because I think you and I both needed a place to land." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She stood at Sophie's bedside watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in the rhythmic way that always calmed her. She whispered old lullabies and let the silence stretch between verses. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the stars. They seemed closer in Montana, sharper, as if the sky was trying to whisper something back. She didn't believe in signs, but she believed in Wade's voice when he said, "You're not broken." She believed in Jesse's cranes and Sophie's laughter, in the way her hands no longer trembled every time someone touched her shoulder. Maybe this wasn't a landing. Maybe it was the beginning of a return. The weather turned without warning. Montana spring had a mean streak, and this time it crept in with an icy wind and sullen clouds that hovered low over the horizon like a threat unspoken. The sun disappeared behind the gray, and the mood in the house shifted barely but noticeably. Claire felt it in her chest, like an old bruise flaring up. Wade was in town early that morning, helping a neighbor fix a tractor axle, while Jessie played board games with Sophie in the living room. Claire stood in the kitchen stirring soup with one hand and balancing Sophie's feeding schedule in the other. The doorbell rang. Not a knock. A bell. Too sharp. Too official. Claire froze. She wasn't used to visitors. In her world, doorbells didn't bring neighbors with pies. They brought questions, or threats, or papers she was expected to sign without fully understanding them. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and approached slowly. Through the window, she spotted a figure, tall, clean-cut clipboard, in hand government posture. A local caseworker, a veteran affairs representative. Or worse, someone who had heard a rumor and came to make it true. She opened the door a few inches. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice flat. The man smiled a little too tight. "Good morning. Sorry to barge in, ma'am. Name's Grant Lewis. I'm with Child Services." Claire's fingers went cold. "I was contacted by a local resident with concerns about a child living here." He continued flipping through the papers clipped to his board. A young girl with visible medical needs in a non-licensed care facility. Claire's ears rang. "I'm her mother," she said. "This is my daughter." "Of course, I understand." "May I come in?" "No." He blinked, surprised. Claire stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her just enough to keep the warmth in. "You have no right to see her without a court order or probable cause. Do you have either?" "I don't want trouble," he said smoothly. "I just want to make sure the child is safe." "She's safe," Claire said, steel in her voice now, for the first time in a long time. Behind her, she heard Sophie cough soft, but timed cruelly. Lewis narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult. I know what it's like to feel cornered." "No, you don't," Claire snapped. "You don't know what it's like to sleep in shelters, to be turned away because your kid needs a feeding tube. You don't know what it's like to watch people look at your daughter like she's a burden." He opened his mouth to respond, but Claire didn't wait. "I suggest you leave now, and if you come back, bring a warrant." She turned and went inside without another word. Wade returned that afternoon to find Claire sitting on the edge of the porch, steps, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though she were trying to hold everything together from the outside in. He parked the truck and walked toward her slowly. "What happened?" Claire didn't look up. "Someone reported us." Wade's brow furrowed. "What do you mean reported?" Child Services came. "Said someone in the town filed a complaint about a disabled child being cared for in an unregulated home." Her voice was bitter. Translation someone doesn't like, that I exist. Wade sat beside her. "Did they see Sophie?" "No, but I didn't let them." He exhaled. "Good." Claire turned toward him then, and her face was a war between fury and heartbreak. "Wade, if they come back with a court order, I could lose her. Just like that. They'll say I'm unstable, unemployed, a transient with a medical-dependent child and no permanent address. You're not a transient. You live here now." Claire shook her head. "I can't put that burden on you." "You didn't." Wade Noe interrupted gently but firmly. "You didn't put anything on me. I opened that door. I asked you to come in. You and Sophie belong here. Not just because it's safe, but because we want you here." Her lip trembled. "But if Jessie's school hears about this, if the neighbors start talking..." "Let them." She stared at him. He softened. "Claire, you've been in fight or flight for so long you don't remember what it feels like to just stand still. But you're not alone now. You don't have to run. Not this time. But fear has a way of slipping through even the thickest doors. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The shadows on the walls felt too tall. Every creak in the house made her reach for her boots. She stood in Sophie's room, holding her daughter close, whispering soft reassurances. But even her voice wavered. And then Jesse appeared, barefoot, pajama-clad, holding something in his hands. "I made you this," he said, voice small. Claire turned. In his palm was a paper crane, this one made from a piece of graph paper torn from his math notebook. "I wrote a wish inside," he said proudly. Claire knelt and unfolded it gently. Inside, in wobbly handwriting, it read, "I wish Miss Claire and Sophie stay forever." Her chest ached. She hugged Jesse tightly, eyes stinging. "Do you really want us to stay?" she whispered. Jesse pulled back, matter of fact. "Well, yeah. Dad makes better pancakes when you're around." The next morning, Claire found Wade already up sipping coffee on the porch. "I'm staying," she said before he could ask. Wade smiled without turning his head. "I was hoping you would." "But I want to earn it," she added. "Not just take your kindness. Let me clean cook, do the books for your shop, whatever it takes. You don't owe me anything, I know," Claire said. "That's why I want to give back." He turned to her then. "You already are. It started with a nail." Claire was fixing a loose step on the front porch, a hammer tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. Sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The sun finally broke through the lingering clouds that had shadowed them for days, and with it came a restlessness. In her hands she hadn't felt in years. She needed to build something, to fix something that wasn't just broken wood or rusty hinges. She needed to leave a mark, not just in the dust of someone's kindness, but in the grain of something that could last. Wade leaned against the doorway, sipping his third cup of coffee, pretending not to watch her. But he was. Every move, every measured hit of the hammer, every glance toward the field when she thought no one was looking. "I was going to get to that today," he said, nodding toward the step. Claire glanced up, eyes catching the morning sun. "Too late." "I beat you to it." Wade chuckled. "At this rate, I'll be out of things to fix, and excuses to come check on you." She smirked, but didn't respond. Not in words, at least. The quiet between them had become its own kind of language, comfortable, steady, unspoken, but understood. Inside, Jesse and Sophie were creating chaos in the form of papier-mâché. The kitchen table had been transformed into a battlefield of flour paste, newspaper strips, and balloon molds. Jesse was building a volcano for a school project, while Sophie, in her way, pressed small shapes with her fingers into a mound that Jesse insisted was the village it would destroy. Claire had learned to interpret Sophie's quiet sounds, her hand gestures, her moments of joy and frustration. Every tiny expression on her daughter's face was a novel in itself, and lately, miraculously, those expressions had multiplied. Since they'd come to Wade's, Sophie had started humming. Not words, not quite music, just sound. Hope wrapped in breath. Later that day, Claire and Wade drove into town. It wasn't far, 15 minutes of open road lined with pine and cottonwood, with an old gas station, one diner, a post office, and a hardware store that doubled as a general supply shop. Claire hadn't been back since the visit from child services. Wade had offered to go alone, but she refused. "I'm not hiding," she'd said. They walked side by side down Main Street. People looked. Some nodded. A few didn't hide their curiosity. Claire held her head high anyway. Sophie was in the back seat with Jesse, and she'd left a note taped to the window. "We're just like you. We're just trying." At the diner, Mary Jean, the woman who ran the lunch shift, gave Claire a tight smile and said, "Glad to see you're still around." Claire smiled back, but the tension in her chest didn't ease until they were driving home again. Wade noticed. "Let them talk," he said. "Talking's all some people know how to do." "I don't care what they say about me," Claire replied. "I care what Sophie hears. What Jesse hears." "You're protecting them," Wade said softly. "But don't forget they're watching how you stand too, not just what you stand against." That night, Wade found Claire in the workshop, out back, the one his father had used to build cedar shelves and fix broken chairs when Wade was a boy. It smelled of sawdust and oil and old memories. Claire was sanding a piece of reclaimed wood. Wade leaned in the doorway. "You're supposed to be resting." "I don't rest well," she said. "What is it you're making?" Claire looked down at the board in her lap. "A name sign. For Sophie's room. Just something small." She turned it around to show him. The letters were still rough, carved by hand with an old chisel, but they were hers. And they were beautiful. Wade crossed the room and sat beside her. "I thought you said you didn't know how to stay," he said. "I don't," Claire replied. "But every time I pack our things, something in me breaks." She looked at him. Really looked. "I'm tired of running, Wade." He reached over, brushing a curl of sawdust from her cheek. "Then don't." She swallowed hard. "I don't want to take your kindness for granted." "You're not," he said. "You're answering it." The next day, Sophie's room became hers. Really hers. They painted the walls a soft yellow Jesse, choosing it because it looks like sunlight. Wade installed shelves at just the right height for Sophie's reach. Claire added a mobile of paper cranes above her daughter's bed, strung with fishing wire so it would turn in the breeze from the window. That night, Claire tucked Sophie in and read from a battered copy of Charlotte's Web. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes glistened. Her hand found Claire's, and for the first time in months, she fell asleep without needing to be held. Claire sat there long after just watching her daughter breathe. Downstairs, Wade poured 2 glasses of wine and waited. Claire joined him on the porch, arms folded, sweater draped around her shoulders. "You made this place feel like home," he said. "Not me." She sipped the wine. "It's still yours." Wade shook his head. "I think maybe it was always waiting for you." They sat in silence, stars flickering above them like quiet witnesses. Then Claire spoke softly. "Do you think broken people can build something whole together?" Wade turned to her. "I don't think there's any other way." The knock came on a quiet Sunday morning. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. Claire had just pulled a batch of muffins from the oven, while Wade and Jesse tinkered with the old radio in the living room, trying to coax a jazz station out of the static. Sophie sat at the table, coloring her small hands, smudging the crayon lines with soft intent. It was one of those rare mornings where time didn't rush, where peace wrapped around them like a quilt. And then it happened. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, not frantic, not familiar. Claire froze. Wade looked up from the radio. Jesse paused mid-sentence. Even Sophie turned her head, eyes wide and still. The sound came again, measured, unhurried, like whoever stood outside already knew what waited on the other side. Claire set the muffin tray down with shaking hands. "I'll get it," Wade said, already moving toward the door. But Claire stepped in front of him. "No," she said softly. "It's for me." Wade hesitated, then stepped back, his hand resting near her elbow there if she needed strength. Claire opened the door. Standing on the porch beneath the soft sun of early spring was a man in uniform. Army green jacket, broad shoulders, stubble lining a familiar jaw. He looked older than she remembered, more sunburned, thinner, but his eyes were the same. Steel gray. Steady. "Claire," he said, voice thick with disbelief. "It's really you." Her knees nearly buckled. "Luke," she whispered. He nodded. I didn't know where to find you. Someone from the VA mentioned your name." Said you'd been through Montana. I've been looking for you for months." Claire stared at him, heart thudding against her ribs. Luke Monroe. Her half-brother. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 6 years. Their last words were shouted in a dusty military hangar overseas shortly before Claire's final deployment. She had enlisted against their father's wishes. Luke had gone 1st Marine Corps 2 tours, a lifetime of silence and discipline. But after their mother died, Claire couldn't stay behind anymore. She wanted to serve, not just survive. They parted on rough terms, and then Luke went missing in action during a classified mission. For years, she believed he was dead. No confirmation. No remains. Just a name engraved on a wall and a sister who mourned in pieces. How Claire's voice caught. "How are you alive?" Luke looked down, jaw clenched. "It's a long story. I was in a medical facility for over a year. Memory loss. TBI. They didn't clear my file until last summer, and even then I didn't remember much. Just fragments. Your name kept coming up in the dreams." Claire stepped outside, her hand trembling as she reached for him. He caught her in a tight embrace. It wasn't graceful. It was shaking and gasping and desperate and real. Inside, Wade ushered Jesse and Sophie into the other room. He didn't eavesdrop, though every part of him wanted to understand what had just cracked open in Claire's world. She returned 15 minutes later, her face flushed, her hands wringing the hem of her shirt. Luke followed close behind, glancing at the walls, the photographs, the quiet signs of life in the house. "This is Wade." Claire said, her voice steadier now. "And that's Jesse." "Sophie is." She looked toward the hallway, where Sophie peeked from behind the doorframe. Luke's face softened. "Is that?" he began. Claire nodded. "Your niece." Luke dropped to one knee. "Hi, Sophie," he said gently. "I'm your Uncle Luke. You don't know me yet, but I've known about you for a long time." Sophie tilted her head, her fingers curling shyly into the edge of the wall. Claire watched tears building again. This wasn't the reunion she'd ever dreamed of. It was quieter, stranger, messier. But it was real. Over lunch, the 5 of them sat around the table like something out of a painting Claire never believed she'd be in. Luke spoke in fragments about his recovery, the lost months, the dreams he couldn't place, about the guilt of surviving when so many hadn't, about finding Claire's name in a VA list and chasing it like a breadcrumb trail across the country. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to be present. "I don't know if I deserve to be here," he said, watching Sophie eat banana slices one at a time. "But I want to know her. I want to know you." Claire reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You're already here," she said. That night, as the house quieted and the stars bloomed over Montana, Claire stepped out onto the porch with Wade. She leaned into the rail, shoulders loose for the first time in days. "I thought I buried him," she said quietly. "I mourned a ghost. And now?" "And now," Wade echoed, "you get a second chance." Claire nodded. "It scares me how much I still love people who've left." "They didn't all leave," Wade said, his voice low. "Some just took longer to find their way back." She turned to him, the porch light warming her profile. "I don't know what happens next." "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to stay." She looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders touched. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was permission. The sun returned the next morning, not timid or tentative, but bold and golden, flooding the kitchen with a warmth that felt almost sacred. After weeks of gray skies, restless worry, and old wounds torn open, Claire stood at the sink, with her hands in a bowl of soapy water, watching the steam rise as sunlight cut across the counter. Luke had spent the night in the guest room. His presence was still surreal. Every time she passed by that door, a part of her braced to wake from a dream. But there he was, her brother, flesh and blood, not a memory or a gravestone. Alive, present, healing. In the living room, Jesse and Sophie were sprawled on a quilt, with an open board game between them and a bag of marshmallows that had clearly become unofficial game pieces. Claire watched from the doorway as Jesse helped Sophie place a card on the board, narrating every move with exaggerated drama and sound effects. Your unicorn has reached the lava moat. What's your next move? Lady Sophie. Sophie didn't speak, but her smile was unmistakable. Claire pressed her hand to her chest. This was the life she never dared to imagine, not chaotic or glamorous, but ordinary in the most miraculous way. That afternoon, Jesse had a surprise. I've been planning this for weeks, he said, puffing with pride. But I needed the sun to show up, which it finally did. So now it's time. He led them to the backyard, where a low table had been set up beneath the big sycamore tree. On it sat a small cardboard cake, an uneven stack of paper plates, and a crooked sign that read, Happy Sophie Day. Claire blinked. What is this? Jesse beamed. We missed her birthday last month, right? I figured she deserves a party anyway. Wade walked out carrying a plate of fresh cupcakes and a sparkler in place of a candle. Luke followed, holding a speaker playing quiet music, his face unreadable, but his eyes shimmering. Sophie was rolled out in her chair, bundled in a soft sweater. When she saw the sign, her entire body lit up. She clapped her hands, made a happy noise from deep in her chest, and reached out toward Jesse with glee. Claire knelt beside her daughter, speechless. You did this for her, she asked Jesse. For both of you, he said. She deserves to be celebrated. So do you. Claire didn't cry right away. She saved it for later when the sparklers fizzled out, when Sophie smeared frosting on her cheeks, and when Luke told her, You've built something beautiful here, kid. You're not surviving anymore. You're living. After cake, Wade pulled a guitar from the porch. I didn't know you played, Claire said, surprised. I don't. Not well, he replied. But Aaron used to sing. I played just enough to keep up. He sat on a wooden crate and strummed a simple melody, raw and a little clumsy, but full of something purer than perfection. Claire sat in the grass beside Sophie's chair. Luke leaned back against the tree, his arms folded across his chest, eyes closed. Jesse laid flat on his stomach, humming along. Wade sang low and steady. You don't need to ask the wind where it's going, or teach the river where to bend. Sometimes the heart just needs to follow, and trust it'll find its home again. Claire didn't realize her hand had found Wade's until his thumb gently brushed her knuckles. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. That night, as Claire tucked Sophie in, the little girl reached up and touched her mother's cheek. Her fingers brushed a tear Claire didn't know she'd shed. Thank you, Claire whispered, for staying, for choosing me. Over and over. Sophie blinked slowly, her eyes soft and tired. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the love behind them. Claire kissed her forehead and stood, leaving the door cracked open behind her. Downstairs, the lights were dimmed. Wade sat at the kitchen table with a second mug of tea waiting across from him. Claire slid into the chair without a word. They sat like that for a while, two people with too much history and just enough hope to keep trying. Finally, Claire spoke. I've always been waiting for the next storm. Every good thing in my life has ended too soon. Wade nodded. Me too. She looked at him. But today felt different. It was, he said simply. She hesitated. Why do you think that is? Because today, Wade said, reaching across the table to take her hand, you didn't just let it happen. You chose to be part of it. And we chose you back. Claire's fingers tightened around his. Do you think this could be real? She whispered. I think he said it already is. Outside, the sky had opened, not just the clouds, but something deeper. Stars glimmered like tiny promises above the roofline, and a quiet wind swept through the grass as if carrying prayers whispered long ago. In the hallway, Jessie had hung a string of paper cranes above the stairs. They swayed gently in the breeze through the open window. And as Claire watched them dance, she realized she wasn't just passing through someone else's life anymore. She was home. The rain returned one evening without warning, slow and deliberate tapping against the kitchen window, like fingers reminding them that peace, like weather, was never permanent. Claire sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was still save for the occasional creak of old wood settling and the steady hum of Sophie's medical unit in the next room. She had her hands folded on the table in front of her, and beside them, a blank sheet of paper. For weeks now, something had stirred inside her, a quiet knowing. Not fear, not sadness, just the weight of truth she could no longer ignore. This could all be taken away. Not because she didn't belong here, or because she hadn't earned her place, but because life had a cruel way of teaching her that the more you love something, the easier it was to lose it. So she began to write. To whoever finds this, if you're reading it, it means I'm not here to say this out loud. Maybe I left. Maybe I had no choice. No, or maybe my fear finally caught up to me. Either way, there's something I need you to know. Sophie is not a burden. She is not fragile. She is not less. She is the strongest person I know. Stronger than I ever was. If she cries, hold her. If she laughs, let her. And if you're lucky enough to see her fall asleep in your arms, know that you're holding the most sacred thing I've ever known. To Jessie, thank you. You reminded her that friendship doesn't ask for explanations, that being different doesn't mean being left behind. To Wade, there are not enough words, but I'll say the ones I know matter. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us dignity, a place to exhale, a home. If I could ask one thing of you, it's this. Let her keep the cranes. Let her believe that wishes made from paper and love still matter. And please tell her that she was never a mistake. She was the one beautiful thing I brought back from the war. Love, Claire. She folded the paper neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and laid it on the kitchen table beneath the salt shaker, where it would be found, but not immediately noticed. Then she sat there in the dark, watching the storm blur the world outside. Wade found her at dawn. He had risen early, restless. Something in the quiet told him she hadn't slept. When he stepped into the kitchen and saw her at the table, eyes open, fingers clenched, the envelope still untouched, his heart tightened. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. Claire shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I was thinking." He nodded, poured her coffee without asking, and sat across from her. "You ever feel like something so good it can't last?" she asked, eyes fixed on the envelope. "All the time," Wade said. "But I've learned something." She looked up. "It's not about making it last forever," he said. "It's about being brave enough to believe it's real while you have it." Claire didn't speak. Instead, she slid the envelope across the table. Wade didn't open it. He placed his hand over it, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not going to read this unless you disappear." Claire's voice cracked. "And if I do, then I'll read it once, and I'll keep it forever. But I'd rather never read it at all." Her shoulders trembled. "I don't know how to stop preparing for the worst." "You don't have to," Wade said gently. "But maybe you can also start preparing for the best." Later that morning, Claire took Sophie for a walk around the property. The rain had passed, leaving behind the scent of pine and wet soil. Jessie followed behind, with a camera he'd found in the attic, insisting on capturing candid family moments, which mostly meant blurry photos of everyone mid-blink. Sophie giggled as Claire pushed her chair along the gravel path. Every time the wheels bumped, Claire would make a dramatic whoa sound that sent Sophie into little squeals of joy. Wade watched from the porch, heart full. Luke joined him sipping a glass of orange juice. "They look good out there." "They look right out there," Wade replied. Luke nodded slowly. "You think she'll stay for good?" "I think Wade said she already has." That night, as Claire tucked Sophie into bed, her daughter reached up and touched her face. "Ma." Claire froze. Sophie rarely tried to speak. Not real words. Sounds, gestures. Yes, but this was different. Intentional. Heavy with meaning. Claire knelt beside the bed. "Say it again, sweetheart." "Ma." Sophie tried again, lips trembling with effort. Claire cradled her daughter's face, tears running unchecked down her cheeks. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." She didn't need a full sentence. Just that one syllable was enough to fill the parts of her that had long been hollow. Downstairs, Jessie was hanging another string of paper cranes along the staircase. Wade stepped beside him, watching. "She asked me today if the wishes are still working," Jessie said quietly. "And what did you tell her?" I said, "Sometimes they take a while." "But yeah, I think they are." He looked up at Wade. "Do you think she's going to leave?" Wade placed a hand on Jessie's shoulder. "Not this time." Jessie nodded, and together, they tied the last crane onto the string. In the kitchen, the letter still sat beneath the salt shaker. Unread. Untouched. Claire passed by it as she turned off the lights, then paused. She reached for the envelope, ran her fingers along its edges, then slowly, purposefully, tore it in half. She dropped the pieces in the trash, because she didn't need a goodbye anymore. What she needed was tomorrow. Spring didn't arrive in Montana with a parade. It slipped in quietly, softening the frost on the windowsills, loosening the earth beneath the boots, waking the birds before dawn. And in the Bennett home, it arrived in much the same way. Claire found herself humming again. Not the solemn kind she used to sing to Sophie in hospital beds, but the kind that bubbled up without warning, while folding laundry, while stirring soup, while wiping crayon off the wall for the third time that day. She was no longer counting the days. She was living them. Luke had found part-time work at the nearby feed store, easing himself back into civilian life with a quiet steadiness that mirrored Claire's. Jessie was preparing a presentation for school on found family and insisted on drawing all 5 of them as comic book characters. Wade as a cowboy-turned-superhero, Claire as a shield-bearing warrior, Sophie as a floating fairy in a wheelchair, Luke as the silent but cool soldier, and himself as the narrator who brings everyone together with brains and jokes. Claire had cried when she saw it, not because of the drawing, but because in Jessie's world, they weren't strays. They were team. One Saturday, Wade planned something different. "We need a real day," he announced at breakfast. "One without errands. No appointments. No housework." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You mean fun?" Jessie chimed in with capital letters. They packed a picnic. Claire made egg salad sandwiches. Wade threw in lemonade and a few of Mary Jean's famous oatmeal cookies. Jessie insisted on bringing a kite he'd rebuilt with duct tape and hope. Luke added an old thermos of coffee, then carried Sophie to the truck, while Claire secured her portable oxygen kit. They drove out past the ridge to an old field dotted with wildflowers and tall grass, the kind of place where the world felt too big to be dangerous. Sophie's chair rolled gently across the earth as the wind teased her curls. She giggled when Wade showed her how to tilt the kite, her hands gripping the string alongside Jessie's. Luke stood at a distance, watching the scene, like a man grateful to be allowed back into it. Claire wandered into the tall grass and stood still for a long moment, breathing in the scent of damp soil and sky. Wade joined her. "Nice out here," he said softly. She nodded. "Feels like everything I didn't know I needed." Wade smiled. That's what this place does. Claire turned to him. It's not the place. Their eyes met. And in the hush of that wide-open field, she stepped closer, one hand resting against his chest. I didn't believe in beginnings anymore, she whispered. But you didn't give me a new chapter. You gave me back the book. He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. You gave me back something too, he said. The part of me that still believed family wasn't over. That love wasn't something you bury. Then slowly, reverently, he kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was real. The kind of kiss that says, I choose you not once, but every single day after. By late afternoon, Sophie had fallen asleep under the shade of the truck canopy, curled against Claire's chest, her little fingers still wrapped around a piece of yellow string from the kite. Jessie was building a fairy fort with wildflower sticks and way too much enthusiasm. Luke brewed coffee on a small camping stove and poured 2 cups, without a word handing one to Wade. The 5 of them sat in the open field, watching the sun dip low over the hills. No one said anything profound. No one needed to. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive with trumpets. They arrive with presence, with people who stay. That evening back at home, Claire found a package on the porch. No return address. Inside was a plain wooden frame and a note written in careful cursive. I saw this in a shop up north and thought of you. Families aren't always born. Sometimes they're built, and sometimes they're rescued. Keep building. A friend. Claire unfolded the frame. Inside was a print of a quote she had once taped to the wall in Sophie's NICU room, but had long forgotten. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're just becoming something new. She hung it on the wall above the kitchen table beside Jessie's origami cranes. Later that night, after Sophie was tucked in, and Jessie was snoring softly in his room, Claire joined Wade on the porch. She handed him a piece of paper. It was the letter. Not the one she'd torn. A new one. He read it in silence. Dear Wade, I wrote this not because I'm leaving, but because I'm staying. Because even when the storms come again, and I know they will, I want you to know this is the place I choose to face them from. With you. With Jessie. With Luke. With Sophie. Because love isn't just a feeling. It's an address. He looked up, eyes glistening. I love you, Claire said, her voice steady, radiant in its simplicity. Wade didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. He just pulled her in, rested his forehead against hers, and let the silence say what words could never fully hold. And if you had asked them months later, what changed everything, what miracle turned strangers into family, they wouldn't have pointed to the kiss, or the picnic, or even the storm. They'd point to a knock at the door, to the moment a man saw a soldier at a bus stop and said, You're coming with me. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Take a moment and share it in the comments. We truly enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. And if you haven't already, we'd be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. We share real, meaningful stories, like this one every week. Stories that remind us all that love, kindness, and second chances still matter. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself. And until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in the quiet miracles of everyday life.